Jason had never imagined that life could become this strange. One moment he was a normal college student, living alone in his small city apartment, juggling assignments and streaming shows late at night. The next moment, the city went into a complete lockdown. Streets emptied, stores closed, and the university announced that all students must stay home. Isolation was no longer a choice, it was mandatory. Jason felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. Then came the surprise. He was assigned a roommate, not a regular roommate, but an alien. Jason had read about extraterrestrial exchange programs, seen them in sci-fi movies, but never thought he would live with one. Her name was Kayla. Kayla was unlike anything Jason had ever seen. She had sleek silver fur that shimmered faintly in the light, golden eyes that glowed softly when she was curious, and delicate fox-like ears that twitched at every sound. Her long tail moved gracefully behind her, expressing emotions he didn't fully understand yet. There was something hypnotic about her presence, both beautiful and unsettling. At first, living together was manageable. Kayla was polite, organized, and eager to learn about human life. She cooked food in ways that Jason didn't understand but loved anyway. She laughed at his jokes, even the terrible ones, and her laughter had a musical quality that made him feel calm in the tense lockdown. For a while, Jason even forgot that the city outside was empty and silent. But soon, the reality of being trapped together began to settle in. The lockdown wasn't temporary. It stretched on day after day. He and Kayla were confined to the same apartment, sharing space, meals, and every small detail of life. Jason tried to prepare, stocking up on groceries, organizing the apartment, creating schedules. But nothing could prepare him for what was about to happen. It started subtly. Kayla's behavior shifted. She paced in restless loops, her tail flicking sharply, ears flattened against her head when she heard even the faintest sound outside. Sometimes she muttered in her alien tongue, low and urgent, and Jason didn't understand a word. She stopped eating for hours, stared out of the window for long periods, and seemed tense, almost electric. One evening, Jason finally asked, "Kayla, are you okay?" She turned to him, eyes wide and golden, voice trembling. "Jason, I am experiencing something. Intense, humans call it." Heat, Jason froze. Heat. That word belonged in biology books or science fiction. He swallowed hard. Like a period?" he asked awkwardly. Kayla shook her head, her tail flicking with a restless energy. "No, much more. Urgent, emotional. Dangerous if uncontrolled," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. Jason's stomach tightened. Dangerous? He had survived finals, sleepless nights, and even city blackouts, but this felt like nothing he could handle. Kayla seemed fragile one moment and wild the next, her fur bristling and golden eyes glimmering with a mix of fear and need. He forced himself to stay calm. Breathe. Think. Protect. Don't panic. "Okay, Kayla. We'll handle this together," he said. "You're not alone." Her gaze lingered on him, something unspoken passing between them. Trust? Fear? Hope? Jason didn't know, but he nodded, determined. He would protect her. Somehow he would survive too. That night, Jason stayed awake, observing her quietly. He noted her pacing, her small noises, the way her tail twitched when she was anxious. Sleep was impossible, but he didn't care. He realized something powerful. Kayla trusted him. Even in her confusion, even in her fear, she looked to him. And Jason, ordinary and human, realized that maybe he could rise to meet her trust. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or how intense her heat would become. But one thing was certain, life had changed forever. And Jason had to find the courage to face it, not just for himself, but for Kayla, his alien roommate, who depended on him in ways he had never imagined. The next morning, Jason woke to an unusual smell in the apartment. It was sharp, electric, and unfamiliar, lingering in the air like tension. Kayla was already awake, pacing quickly across the living room. Her tail whipped from side to side and her ears twitched at every sound. She muttered in her alien tongue, low and urgent. Jason sat on the edge of his bed, unsure what to do. He watched her carefully. Her golden eyes flicked toward him, wide and anxious, before darting back to the floor. "Kayla, are you feeling worse?" he asked gently. She froze and looked at him, her voice trembling. "I cannot control it. The cycle is accelerating." Jason's stomach tightened. He had expected mood swings, maybe confusion, but accelerating? He had no idea what that meant. He stood slowly, keeping his hands visible so she wouldn't feel threatened. Kayla's movements had grown faster, more frantic. She leapt onto the couch, then back to the floor, pacing, her claws clicking against the wooden floorboards. In a sudden blur, she darted toward the kitchen and knocked over a glass of water. It shattered with a loud crash, and Jason jumped back. "Kayla, careful!" he shouted, though his voice wavered with worry. "I cannot help it," she cried, panic rising in her voice. Her tail coiled tightly, knocking over a small lamp which wobbled dangerously on the edge of the table. Jason dove to steady it, narrowly avoiding disaster. He felt a mix of fear and awe. Kayla was not trying to be destructive, but her body, her instincts were beyond her control. Jason's mind raced. He tried to remember anything from biology, science fiction, or movies that could help him. Medicate, calm, sedate. None of that works on aliens, he thought, panic bubbling under the surface. But Kayla's eyes found his, shimmering golden. And in that moment, he knew panicking would only make things worse. She needed him to stay calm. She needed him to guide her. "Kayla, listen to me," he said firmly but softly, inching closer. "Breathe. One step at a time. I'm here. I won't leave you." Her ears flattened and her tail flicked violently. I am trying," she gasped, but her movements slowed slightly. Jason gently extended a hand toward her, not touching too close, just showing he was present. She hesitated, sniffed the air, and finally, after a tense moment, allowed him to sit beside her on the couch. Jason exhaled slowly. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Kayla leaned slightly against him, trembling as if the small human next to her could somehow anchor her frenzied instincts. Jason's heart raced. He felt her warmth through her fur, her rapid heartbeat, and a strange mix of fear and empathy swept over him. Hours passed like this. Jason guided her gently, offering water, murmuring words of reassurance, and helping her pace in controlled circles. Kayla began to share small details of her home planet in between breaths, forests with glowing trees, nights under twin moons, and how her species handled their heat cycles naturally in packs. Jason listened, fascinated, grateful for the distraction. By evening, Kayla's energy finally began to slow. She flopped onto the couch exhausted and let out a soft, trembling sigh. Jason sat beside her, tired, achy, and mentally drained. He realized something important. He wasn't just surviving her heat cycle, he was learning. Humans had strengths beyond physicality. Patience, empathy, the ability to calm others through presence alone. Kayla looked up at him with golden eyes, softened by trust and exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered. "For staying." Jason gave a weak smile. "I'm not going anywhere, Kayla. We'll get through this. Together." For the first time since the lockdown began, Jason felt a strange mix of relief and pride. Yes, the apartment was a little broken, glasses shattered, furniture scratched, but Kayla's trust in him had grown. And in that moment, he realized something he hadn't known before. Humanity's strength wasn't just in survival or skill. It was in caring, in connection, in rising to challenges not with force but with heart. And as he sat there, exhausted but alert, Jason knew the coming days would test him even more. Kayla's heat wasn't over, it had only just begun. But for now, he had held the line. He had calmed chaos, kept his roommate safe, and learned the first lesson of living with an alien. Empathy was the strongest weapon he had. The next morning, Jason woke to a new kind of chaos. Kayla had already begun moving around the apartment, her silver fur shimmering in the sunlight filtering through the blinds. Her golden eyes were wide and alert, ears twitching at every creak of the building, her tail flicked in rapid, restless motions. Jason sighed, bracing himself. Kayla's heat had reached its peak. The signs were impossible to miss. She paced like a predator, her claws tapping sharply against the floor. She sniffed the air constantly, muttered in her alien language, and sometimes froze mid-step, staring at him with a mix of longing and panic that made Jason's stomach tighten. He had learned some rules by now. Keep calm, give her space, offer reassurance. Avoid touching her unless necessary. Don't panic. He knew it wasn't safe or fair to let fear control him. Kayla needed him, and he had to be the anchor in her storm. "Kayla," he said softly. "It's okay. Just breathe. I'm right here." Her ears twitched, tail coiling and uncoiling like a spring. She paused, trembling. And finally, after a hesitant moment, she sank onto the couch beside him. Jason kept his distance, hands visible, but his presence was a steadying force. She leaned against the cushions, shaking, and let out a low hum that was both a sound of need and relief. Hours passed, and the apartment became a controlled chaos. Glasses teetered on counters, books lay scattered on the floor, and the faint shimmer of her alien scent filled the air. Jason moved carefully, guiding her, speaking softly and offering small comforts. A sip of water, a warm blanket, a reassuring word. Every now and then, Kayla would glance at him, her golden eyes meeting his with unspoken gratitude. "Thank you," she murmured, voice trembling. Jason realized something important. Kayla's heat was not just physical. It was emotional, overwhelming, consuming her focus and energy, but it was also a test for him. Could he remain calm under pressure? Could he provide trust and care even when everything in the apartment seemed chaotic? So far he had passed. He had become her anchor, her guide through the storm of her own biology. By evening, the chaos reached a new level. Kayla's pacing intensified, and she darted toward the kitchen counter, almost knocking over a plate of food. Jason lunged, steadying her just in time. "Easy, Kayla, careful," he said firmly, his heart pounding. She froze for a moment, then leaned back slightly, taking deep, shuddering breaths. Jason felt a mixture of awe and fear. She was powerful, almost wild, yet she trusted him. In that trust, there was something beautiful. A connection that transcended species, even biology itself. Humans were fragile, ordinary creatures in the grand scheme of the universe, but empathy, patience, and courage gave them a strength that few realized. Night fell, and Kayla finally allowed herself to rest. She curled up on the couch, her tail wrapped around her like a protective coil. Jason sat nearby, exhausted but alert, marveling at the bond they had forged. Her golden eyes closed slowly, and he realized she had accepted him as more than a roommate. He was a friend, a protector, someone she could rely on even in her most vulnerable moments. Jason took a deep breath, feeling a warmth in his chest he hadn't known before. Living with an alien in heat during a lockdown was beyond anything he had imagined. But he had survived. He had adapted. He had become stronger, not just in body or mind, but in heart. As he looked at Kayla, sleeping peacefully for the first time in days, he whispered softly, almost to himself, "We'll get through this. Together." The lesson was clear. Survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about trust, compassion, and the courage to face chaos with patience. Humanity's strength wasn't in fighting alone. It was in rising to meet challenges that seemed impossible and proving, quietly, that they could endure, connect, and care even when the odds were stacked against them. For Jason and Kayla, the peak of her heat was terrifying, overwhelming, and exhausting, but it was also the moment that solidified their bond, the first true test of trust between human and alien. And in that moment, Jason understood something profound. Sometimes heroism wasn't about fighting an enemy. It was about being steady when someone else's world was spinning out of control and showing them that they weren't alone. The next few days turned Jason's apartment into what he jokingly but not really called a war zone. Kayla's heat was still strong, and despite his careful efforts, chaos seemed to follow her wherever she went. Books sprawled across the floor. A lamp lay shattered in the corner, and a faint shimmer of alien scent clung to the walls. Yet, amidst the mess, a bond was forming, one that was deeper than Jason had ever imagined. Kayla moved with restless energy, leaping onto counters, darting around corners, and pacing with urgent steps. Her golden eyes flashed, her ears twitched, and her tail lashed with nervous force. Jason had learned quickly that he couldn't stop her entirely. He could only guide her. He had to anticipate her movements, read her cues, and act before disaster struck. "Kayla, slow down," Jason said softly, extending a hand toward her without touching. "We can manage this, one step at a time." She froze, breathing heavily, and for a moment Jason thought she might lash out or panic further. Instead, she tilted her head as if considering him, before lowering herself onto the couch. Her tail wrapped around her legs, trembling. She looked at him with a mixture of fear, need, and something he couldn't name. Gratitude, maybe. Trust, certainly. Jason sat beside her, careful to maintain a safe distance, and watched her settle. He realized that Kayla's heat wasn't just a physical urge. It was emotional, raw, and consuming. She was vulnerable in ways she had never shown before, and it was terrifying. But it was also beautiful. There was a purity in her trust, a softness beneath her frantic movements that made Jason's chest tighten with responsibility. The apartment had become a delicate balance. One wrong step could trigger chaos, but one calm gesture could soothe her. Jason moved slowly, guiding her to a clear corner, offering water and soft words. She followed him, her tail twitching anxiously until she felt safe enough to rest. He could feel her breathing gradually slow, her body relaxing against the cushions. In the quiet moments between the storms, Kayla spoke in broken English, telling Jason small stories about her home planet. She described glowing forests, rivers of liquid light, and nights under twin moons. Her voice was soft, almost musical, and Jason listened intently, fascinated. He realized that these stories weren't just distractions, they were her way of coping, of grounding herself in something familiar while her body and instincts were out of control. By evening, the apartment still looked like a battlefield, but Kayla was calm for the first time in hours. She curled up on the couch, her golden eyes half closed, tail wrapped tightly around her. Jason sat nearby, exhausted, muscles aching from hours of constant vigilance. He realized that survival wasn't just about enduring physical danger. It was about empathy, patience, and connection. He was learning a lesson that went far beyond any human textbook. Humans had strength in caring, in protecting, and in standing steady when others faltered. Kyla's gaze met his, soft and trusting. "Thank you, Jason," she whispered, her voice trembling but sincere. "For staying," Jason smiled despite his fatigue. "I'm not going anywhere, Kayla, you're not alone. We'll get through this." She purred softly, a sound that made Jason's heart skip. It was a comforting, almost musical vibration, and it reminded him that even in chaos there was trust, there was connection, and there was hope. The war zone of their apartment was more than a mess of broken objects. It was the evidence of their struggle together, of the challenges Kayla's body had imposed and Jason's determination to meet them. He had become her anchor, her guide, and in return she had given him something rare: unspoken trust and reliance. That night, Jason looked around the apartment, exhausted, but oddly proud. The chaos was temporary. The mess could be cleaned. But the bond they had formed, that was permanent. In the middle of heat, panic, and broken furniture, Jason realized something profound. Humanity's strength wasn't about dominating or surviving alone. It was about care, empathy, and the courage to stand firm when someone else's world spun out of control. And as Kayla slept lightly, tail flicking softly, Jason knew that whatever came next, whatever the rest of her heat cycle brought, they would face it together, with patience, courage, and trust that crossed the boundaries of worlds. By the 4th week of lockdown, Jason and Kayla had begun to find a fragile rhythm. The chaos that had once ruled the apartment had eased, though not completely. Broken glasses were replaced, the shattered lamp was fixed, and the scattered books were reorganized. But more importantly, a new understanding had formed between them, one of trust, patience, and quiet companionship. Kayla's heat cycles were still strong, but Jason had learned to read her subtle signals. The flick of her tail, the twitch of her ears, the way her golden eyes shimmered when she needed comfort. He had discovered small ways to help her manage the intensity: soft music, warm tea, or guided breathing exercises he had invented himself. And Kyla, in turn, had begun to trust him completely, leaning on his presence without fear or hesitation. One evening, Kyla's energy surged unexpectedly. She paced the living room, tail lashing, muttering softly in her alien language. Jason followed, calm and steady, gently placing a hand near her without touching. "Kayla, I'm here. Just breathe." "Everything is okay," he said. She froze, her golden eyes meeting his. Slowly, her movements softened and she sank onto the couch beside him. Jason stayed nearby, maintaining his role as her anchor, watching as her breathing returned to normal. Kayla leaned against the cushions, her silver fur brushing lightly against his arm. It was a subtle gesture, but for Jason it carried more weight than words could describe. "Jason, you've been patient," she said softly, voice trembling. "Most humans would not understand. Most would leave." Jason shook his head. "I'm not most humans, Kayla. You're my roommate, my friend. I'm not going anywhere." Kayla's golden eyes softened, glimmering with a mixture of gratitude and vulnerability. For the first time she purred, a soft, comforting sound that resonated through the room. Jason smiled faintly, feeling warmth spread through his chest. It wasn't just relief. It was pride. He had become someone she could rely on completely, even when her instincts threatened to overwhelm her. Over the next few days, the rhythm between them grew stronger. Kayla taught Jason to prepare certain meals that calmed her senses. They played small games, chasing holographic lights she projected on the walls, laughing together as she darted and leapt with fluid grace. Jason even began to learn bits of her language, repeating the sounds clumsily but with genuine effort. Kayla's golden eyes sparkled with amusement, and Jason realized that the bond they were forming was deeper than companionship. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes Kayla would flare up unexpectedly, knocking over a chair or muttering in panic. But Jason had grown into his role. He had learned to anticipate her needs, stay calm under pressure, and provide reassurance without hesitation. He had learned that true strength wasn't about fighting. It was about patience, empathy, and the courage to be present when someone else's world was spinning out of control. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Kayla curled up beside him on the couch, her tail coiled protectively around her. "Humans are remarkable," she whispered. "Not because of strength or weapons, but because you care." Jason chuckled softly. "I'm just doing what anyone should do. But thank you, Kayla. That means a lot." She nudged him gently with her head, a playful yet tender gesture. "No, you do more than care. You protect. You stay. You understand. That is humanity." Jason felt a lump in his throat. He had never imagined that living with an alien in heat during a lockdown could teach him so much about himself, about resilience, and about human nature. He had survived chaos, guided Kayla through overwhelming emotions, and emerged stronger, not physically but in heart and spirit. And as they sat together, the apartment quiet except for the hum of the city beyond the walls, Jason realized something profound. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't in dominating or conquering, but in connection, in trust, in empathy, and in proving that even in the most impossible circumstances, humans could rise to meet the challenge, not with force, but with care. Kayla purred softly again, resting her head against the couch. Jason smiled, exhausted but content. They had found calm amid chaos, and for the first time since the lockdown began, he truly believed that they could face anything. Together. Days turned into nights, and slowly, Kayla's heat began to subside. The frantic energy that had overtaken her apartment movements faded into softer, slower gestures. Her tail, once whipping sharply, now curled gently around her, and her ears twitched less anxiously. Jason noticed every subtle change, each sign that she was returning to herself. He had grown accustomed to the chaos, to being constantly alert, and now he realized how much he had learned. He could anticipate Kayla's moods, soothe her with just a word or a gesture, and even make her laugh with small, silly human tricks. More than anything, he had become someone she could rely on completely, a rare honor for someone of his kind. One evening, as the golden light of sunset poured through the window, Kayla moved toward him. Her eyes, soft and shining, held something he hadn't seen before: gratitude, warmth, and a deep trust that made his chest tighten. She stopped just in front of him, her tail wrapping lightly around her legs, and spoke in a quiet voice. "Jason, you stayed. Through everything." He nodded, smiling faintly, though exhaustion tugged at his muscles. "Of course, Kayla, I promised. I'm not leaving." She hesitated for a moment, then moved closer, resting her head lightly against his shoulder. Jason froze briefly, feeling the warmth of her fur against his skin, the subtle rhythm of her breathing, and the trust she placed in him. This wasn't just gratitude. It was a connection forged through chaos, fear, and vulnerability. Jason realized something profound. Humanity's strength wasn't about fighting, conquering, or showing dominance. It was about being present when someone needed you, offering support when circumstances were overwhelming, and showing compassion even when the world seemed impossible. And in this alien, fragile creature, he had seen that truth reflected back at him. Kayla's voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Humans, you are remarkable. I thought strength meant power, control, but you show it in ways I never imagined. You protect. You stay. You care." Jason swallowed, words failing him for the first time in months. He had guided her through the storm, Yet her words reminded him that what he had done wasn't just physical or practical, it was profoundly human. She had trusted him, relied on him, and now acknowledged it in the only way she knew how. The apartment was quiet. The remnants of chaos still scattered around. The knocked-over lamp, the scattered books, the faint shimmer of her alien presence. Yet it didn't feel messy anymore. It felt lived in, shared and transformed by the bond they had created. Jason gently adjusted a cushion behind Kayla as she leaned against him. She closed her eyes, letting herself rest fully for the first time since her heat began. Her trust was complete. She no longer feared losing control because she knew he would guide her through it. "I never thought I would need anyone like this," Kayla admitted softly. "But you were here." Jason smiled, exhausted but proud. "I think we both needed each other, Kayla. You helped me see what humans can be when we really care." For the first time, Jason allowed himself to relax completely. The lessons of the past weeks, the sleepless nights, the chaos, the moments of fear, had shaped him. He realized that heroism wasn't always dramatic or visible. Sometimes it was quiet, subtle, and born from simple acts of patience and empathy. As night fell, the city outside remained locked down, silent and tense. But inside the apartment, two beings, one human, one alien, sat together, connected not just by circumstance, but by trust, courage, and shared experience. Jason's heart swelled with a sense of accomplishment, not from surviving, but from proving to Kayla and to himself that humans could rise to challenges with compassion, patience, and steadfastness. Kayla's soft purr vibrated against the couch, a sound of contentment and trust. Jason rested his head beside hers, feeling a deep, unspoken bond. Chaos had tested them. Her heat had threatened to overwhelm. But they had endured, and together, they had emerged stronger. Jason realized with clarity that humanity's true power wasn't in weapons, strength, or numbers. It was in empathy, trust, and the ability to stand steady when someone else's world was spinning out of control. And in Kyla's golden eyes, he saw that truth reflected back, simple and undeniable. The lockdown finally ended. City streets buzzed with cautious activity, stores reopened, and people stepped outside with relief and hesitancy. Jason looked out the window of his apartment, taking in the familiar sights of cars, pedestrians, and distant sirens. Everything seemed normal, but he knew that he had changed. So had Kayla. Inside the apartment, the remnants of her heat cycle were gone. The frantic pacing, the chaotic energy, the constant tension, it had all subsided. Kayla now moved gracefully, calm, and almost serene. Her golden eyes, once wide with panic and need, now held a quiet warmth reflecting trust and gratitude. Jason stood near the doorway watching her. "Kayla, it's over. You're okay now," he said softly. She nodded, tail brushing gently against the floor. "Yes, I feel balanced again. But more importantly, you stayed. Through it all." Jason smiled, a mixture of relief and pride washing over him. "Of course. I promised. You weren't alone, and I wasn't leaving." Kayla's gaze softened. She walked toward him, moving slowly, deliberately. For a moment, Jason's heart pounded. This wasn't about her heat anymore. It was about connection, trust, and acknowledgement. She stopped in front of him, tail curling lightly around her legs, and tilted her head. "Humans, you are remarkable. I thought I understood strength. But you show it differently. Through care. Through patience, through staying." Jason swallowed. He realized she wasn't just complimenting him. She was acknowledging humanity itself. She had experienced the chaos of instinct, the raw intensity of biology, and yet it was human empathy that had guided her, steadied her, and kept her safe. He had never felt prouder of his species. Kayla moved closer and nudged his shoulder gently with her head, a tender gesture of trust and affection. Jason reached out, lightly resting his hand on her silver fur, not to control, not to restrain, but simply to be present. She leaned into him slightly, purring softly, and he felt the bond they had forged over weeks of chaos and sleepless nights deepen even further. The apartment, once a war zone of overturned furniture and scattered books, now felt alive. It was filled with shared experiences, moments of fear, lessons in patience and unspoken trust. The broken lamp had been replaced, the scattered books tidied, but the memories of their struggle lingered, a quiet reminder of how far they had come together. Jason laughed softly. "You know, I never thought surviving a lockdown would teach me so much." about aliens, life, and humanity. Kayla tilted her head, golden eyes shimmering. It was not just survival. Hewitt guided me, protected me, stayed when most would flee. That is strength. That is human. Jason's chest tightened. He had faced chaos, fear, and overwhelming circumstances. But what made him strong wasn't muscle or instinct. It was heart, courage, compassion. And Kayla had seen it, felt it, and understood it. They stepped toward the window together, looking out at the city slowly coming back to life. The streets were crowded, voices filled the air, and yet Jason felt a quiet peace. He realized that humanity's power wasn't measured in weapons, technology, or dominance. It was in trust, in empathy, and in standing steady when someone else's world spins out of control. Kayla rested her head lightly on his shoulder. "I will never forget this," she said softly. "Not just the chaos, but you, humanity, through you." Jason smiled, his hand brushing gently over her fur. "And I won't forget it either, Kayla. You taught me as much as I taught you, maybe more. And together, we've proven something